Okay, today we're going to be talking about cellular respiration and how it relates in the context of dietary energy. This opener is regarding the movie Super Size Me and how our culture has really responded to the obesity rate. Here are four driving questions that you need to answer. Why do humans weigh more than they used to in the past? How does the body use the energy in food? How does aerobic respiration extract useful energy from food? And when does fermentation occur? And why can't it sustain human life? So, why are people getting heavier? Well, it has been noted that the global obesity rates have doubled since 1980. The reason being is because of biology, and secondly, because of culture. In our biological history, famine was very common, and therefore our human bodies have evolved to hoard energy in the form of fat to get through times when food was very scarce. The other factor is culture or cultural influence. An abundance of high fat processed food is incredibly and also increasingly common in developed countries because of the fact that it's very easy to get and it's cheap to process. Here's a picture of the rate of obesity, and notice how the United States is climbing at a much higher rate than all the other uh, countries that around the world. So, how heavy is too heavy? Obese means you have 20% more fat uh, than recommended for one's height, and also gender, body type, and frame size are taken into account. The reason being obesity is a big problem is the fact that it leads to heart disease, diabetes, and other related illnesses. Here's a way to check obesity, and it has to do with what's called a body mass index. So over here you can see if you are 5'6", your recommended body mass index, meaning that you should have roughly about 24% fat in your body. Okay, so that's the healthy range. As you go up, okay, you become overweight in the orange, and then in red, you're considered obese. Obviously, BMI does not account for muscle mass, gender, or frame size, so um, therefore, it's not completely accurate. So why are Americans getting heavier? Well, if you look here on this side, you can see that our portion size, except for one, Hard Rock Cafe, um, they're a lot bigger. So therefore, we just eat more in general. So why does eating food lead to weight gain? Food not only is a source of nutrition, but it's also a source of energy. And remember that energy is the power to do work. Energy, for our purposes, is measured in calories. In calories, 1 calorie is equal to the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Food energy is measured in capital calories, which is equivalent to 1,000 little calories, or equivalent to 1 kilocalorie. Food obviously contains macromolecules such as fats, proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. And remember that this food is broken down into its subunits and used to make new molecules and as a source of energy. Okay, So carbohydrates provide energy, proteins provide energy, and fats provide energy as well. Nucleic acids do not. Fats provide about 9 calories per gram, meaning that it provides the most amount of energy per gram of food. Proteins and carbohydrates provide only 4 calories per gram of food, and nucleic acids are not a significant source of stored energy. Another factor is not everyone burns calories at the same rate. It has to do with genetics, muscle mass, and gender. Okay? You have more muscle, you will metabolize energy a lot quicker than someone that doesn't have a lot of energy, a lot of muscle. Genetics also, some people are just have a higher metabolism because of genetics. And lastly, men over women. Men tend to metabolize faster than women do. If you take a look at this table here, calories in versus calories out, here is the food, and that is calories in, and then activity, things that we do to burn off those calories are considered calories out, the output. Notice how exercise, you burn off more energy than do sleeping or sitting or standing. So, how do we store extra energy? Okay, well, we store it in two ways. One, we store it in the form of glycogen, which is a type of carbohydrate, and it's found in muscle and liver cells, and triglycerides, which is fat, and those are stored in fat cells. So here's an example of glycogen. Glycogen is made up of simple sugars. It's the equivalent of starch, but only animals do this. And they link all these simple sugars together, and those are stored in muscles or the liver where they can be easily available. Triglycerides, which is a type of fat, and it's found in fat cells and used for long-term energy storage. The difference between burning glycogen versus burning triglycerides is that the body will burn fat only when it has used up all the available food molecules in the bloodstream or in stored glycogen. So once that happens, then it will start looking at the fat cells and start metabolizing those. So burning excess calories, obviously when you eat something, you are taking in uh, energy, and each different food type will give you a different amount of energy. However, when you burn it off, more energy taken in that is needed will equal stored fat. So if you sleep a lot, you sit around, you stand, you don't do much of anything, you are not burning a lot of calories. Therefore, if you eat a lot and you're sedentary or kind of just don't do much, um, you're going to store energy as fat. So the way the body extracts energy from food is it basically converts it. It converts it um, to a molecule called ATP. Okay, so in other words, it's like a energy conversion. And the way I like to describe it, it's like going to a foreign country and taking the dollar bill and converting it to something that is useful in that country. Well, your body doesn't understand food molecules, but what it does understand in terms of energy and how to power cellular functions is this powerful molecule called ATP. And ATP looks like this. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's got a nitrogen base, it's got a sugar called ribose, and it has 3 phosphate groups attached. This molecule stores a lot of energy, okay? But the way we get the energy is we break these bonds. When we break these bonds, we release energy that the cell can use to uh, provide energy for its cellular functions. This just basically reiterates the fact that ATP has chemical bonds that are broken and energy is released, allowing cellular energy for the cells in order to do work. So again, through digestion, our bodies break down food molecules into smaller subunits. These subunits then enter the bloodstream where they are carried to the body's cells, and that's when the cells actually convert that into ATP or stored energy. So inside the cells, enzymes break the bonds holding the subunits together, and then the potential chemical energy stored in the bonds is captured and converted into molecular bonds that make up ATP. So this is basically the process. This is called cellular respiration, where we take food, glucose in this case, it could be any molecule, fat, glucose, but glucose is primarily used because it's the easiest to convert, plus the oxygen that we breathe produces this ATP energy that we're going to use for later on, and waste products such as carbon dioxide and water. In order for this to happen, this is considered an aerobic process, meaning that it needs to be in the presence of oxygen for these series of reactions to occur. Okay, and the series of reactions that occur happen in the powerhouse of the cell called the mitochondria. Okay, and this is where most of the conversion happens between these uh, food molecules as well as oxygen, and converts it to water and carbon dioxide, which is waste. But really what it's really trying to do is convert it to ATP. Again, glucose is the most common source of energy for all organisms. Aerobic respiration of glucose is summarized again as follows. Glucose plus oxygen makes carbon dioxide plus water plus energy, and it's an exothermic reaction, and it produces a little heat as well. This just summarized the entire process. Now we're going to kind of break it down at a closer look here. Okay, and there's actually 3 steps in this aerobic respiration. There's step 1, which is glycolysis, step 2, which is the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, named after a scientist, and the third process is called the electron transport chain. The first step in this process is uh, occurs in the cytoplasm, so it doesn't occur in the mitochondria at all. Okay, it happens in the cytoplasm. It's a series of reactions that break down sugar into smaller units, which we call pyruvate. Okay, so it takes the sugar, breaks it apart into these molecules, which are then going to enter the next step, which is the citric acid cycle. In this process, it makes 2 ATP molecules, again, that are going to be banked for use for later on. The citric acid cycle is the next step. It's the second step of aerobic respiration. Again, it's a series of reactions. We're not going to get into that. But what it does is it helps extract energy from food by extracting their high energy electrons. And those electrons are picked up by a molecule called NAD+. And this NAD+ is going to be important to the electron transport process. In this cycle, Okay, for every one pyruvate, it releases an ATP, and it also releases an NADH, where these high energy electrons are picked up and then transferred. The most important part of this step is the electrons being picked up by this NADH, and then they're going to be dropped off in the electron transport chain. This is very important that oxygen is available during this step, okay, because oxygen accept the transported electrons down here in the electron transport chain, which then form water. Without oxygen, the citric acid cycle would not happen. It would actually shut off. The final step in this is the electron transport chain. The final step in aerobic respiration. Electrons stripped from the citric acid cycle are carried to the inner membranes of the mitochondria from the NADH molecule. Electrons are passed down a chain of molecules until it reaches oxygen. And oxygen is the final acceptor of these electrons. They combine with some hydrogens to produce water. Lastly, what to know is that 36 ATPs are produced in this one step here. So a lot of ATPs. The most ATPs are produced here in the electron chain transport. So like I mentioned before, cells can also burn other molecules for food. Fats, amino acids can also be used for fuel for aerobic respiration. Fats will obviously give off more electrons and therefore produce more ATP. That's why they produce 9 calories per gram instead of 4. But it takes more conversions, more enzymes, more chemical reactions for them to convert fats and amino acids to a usable substance in the glycolysis process. So what happens when oxygen is scarce? So this happens when oxygen consumption exceeds oxygen intake. And what happens is the electron transport has no oxygen to receive any electrons at the end. Okay? So this happens when you exercise. You start breathing hard, okay, because your body is trying to keep up, maintain homeostasis by keeping up with the oxygen depletion. And you breathe faster and harder so it can replenish the oxygen faster. But sometimes that replenishment is too slow, and your oxygen consumption is going too quickly. So there's a second cycle that happens, and your electron transport chain shuts down. Your glycolysis, not your glycolysis, your Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle stops. And what is left is still glycolysis. Glycolysis will occur in the absence of oxygen. So it's really considered an anaerobic process, even though it's part of the aerobics cellular respiration process. Anyway, without oxygen, the products now undergo what's called fermentation. And what fermentation is, it's just a mechanism to still continue to make ATP, but it's only making 2 at a time. So it's really using a lot of food in order for this to not really get a huge payoff in ATP. In us, we make lactic acid as a byproduct of fermentation. You probably understand this if you've exercised a lot and your muscles get sore because of the fact that you've depleted all your oxygen in your muscles, and now they underwent fermentation and they produced an acid called lactic acid, which has that burning sensation after you work out. Plants and fungi, such as yeast, will undergo a different type of fermentation called alcoholic fermentation, and that's where they produce alcohol. Some of the products that not some, but alcoholic products that we consume use this process of fermentation where they take away the oxygen from the either the it's usually yeast that they use. Sometimes they use bacteria, but yeast um, in order to produce the alcohol for alcohol beverages. Animals, again, will undergo lactic acid, so we cannot undergo alcoholic fermentation. Animals will undergo lactic acid, and plants and fungi, such as yeast and bacteria, will undergo alcoholic fermentation. So there's a give and take relationship that form a cycle between photosynthesis and aerobic respiration. Photosynthesis, we're going to be talking about next class. And what it is, it's basically taking light energy and creating food in the form of glucose, and it also produces oxygen. And then we take this oxygen in, eat the glucose, and we put out the carbon dioxide, which is used in photosynthesis. So the inputs for cellular respiration um, are used, and then the outputs, which are carbon dioxide and water, are inputted in photosynthesis. So again, obesity is influenced by biology and culture. 20 years ago, um, food was a lot smaller and less calories, and today they're a lot larger, bigger portion size, which create more calories that are not being burned off because we're more of a sedentary culture, create more storage of fat. There's different types of fats. Um, One that you really need to be careful of when you're eating or consuming any kind of food, trans fat, which is a type of vegetable fat. Okay, that's okay. However, it's been hydrogenated, which means that they add hydrogen atoms to it. And what happens is this acts like a butter or a Crisco or a basically a solid fat. Hydrogenated fats behave much like saturated fats, like animal fat or like butter, and they solid at room temperature. And what can happen is the reason why the food manufacturers add these trans fats is to give them a longer shelf life, and also it's just the taste better. However, there's some dietary implications in the fact that if you eat too much trans fats or saturated fats, it can clog arteries and that can cause heart disease and strokes and things like that. Fats that are more healthful are unsaturated fats, and that comes from plants. And those fats are in the liquid form, and they're considered more healthy because they don't have the same adverse effects as the saturated fats. Olive oil is an example. So, in summary, macronutrients in our food, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, are sources of dietary energy. Cells carry out chemical reactions that break down food and to obtain usable energy in the form of ATP. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration form a cycle. The carbon dioxide given off during aerobic respiration is used by photosynthesizers to make glucose and oxygen. Exercise helps burn stored calories. During exercise, glycogen is used first. Stored fats are trapped only when glycogen stores have been depleted. When we consume more calories than we use, our bodies store the excess energy in the bonds of glycogen and body